Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. Welcome to Alaska Weather. It's September 12th, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information by calling 1-800-472-0391. All of your information is always on the World Wide Web. Weather.gov/Alaska is an easy place to remember and start with, but if you'd like to localize your weather information a little bit more, head to weather.gov/Fairbanks, weather.gov/Anchorage, or weather.gov/Juneau. Each one of the weather forecast offices around the state will meet your needs with your local forecast information, your local satellite and radar pictures, as well as observations that can get you started 24 hours a day. And don't forget about weather.gov/AAWU. That's the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit. And of course, your general aviation concerns are met there. David.Snider@NOAA.gov is an easy way to get a hold of me. You see something you like, see something you hate, please let me know. We're open to your criticisms and comments. And of course, I'd love to hear what you like as well. Here's a look at the hazardous weather across Alaska tonight. Wind advisories are the main culprit. As we look at the Alaska Range, you'll notice some of the stronger winds will be forming across the eastern sections of some of our state's highest peaks. So winds there, and for all of the regions shaded in yellow tonight, could be as strong as about 15 to 30 miles an hour sustained, and in some cases even stronger, perhaps up to 50 miles per hour. Gusts, though, will be the main factor as usual. And the strongest gusts could range anywhere from 40 to 60 miles per hour. It looks like the strongest of which will be from around the Dehne region to the Toke Cutoff, where we could get into some pretty gusty situations this afternoon and this evening and into the early morning hours. That's where we've seen most of our wind already today. Wind gusts so far, though, have not been that bad. They've been in about the 30 to 40 mile an hour range throughout most of the early afternoon. As you look up to the north and west, we also have wind advisories for the upper Kobuk and lower Kobuk and Noatak valleys there, but we also have a concern for flooding, and that is mainly into the Seward Peninsula. In many regions out across the west and northwestern parts of the state, we've already seen substantial amounts of rain over the last couple of weeks. In this case, over the next several days, another 2 to 3 inches of rain is possible in this region, and in some local areas, it could be as much as 4. So you're talking about a 2 to 4 inch range on top of already saturated conditions, and that could mean a pretty quick runoff into your local streams and rivers. If that's the case, that means the flooding concern is going up. So keep that in mind as you're moving out and around, going hunting or finishing up winter preparations, that the water could be coming up in some of your favorite watering holes or perhaps the local streams and rivers where you are. Right now it's just a flood advisory. If that gets much worse, it could be a flood warning. And again, weather.gov/Fairbanks would be the place to monitor for the flooding conditions in the north and west. Moving on to your satellite picture, the low pressure system across the Bering Sea in the upper levels is responsible for this deep west and southwesterly flow coming up through southwestern Alaska, western and northwestern Alaska. You can see that eastern and southeastern Alaska have been benefiting from this flow with a lot of sunshine and clear skies there. And that has allowed temperatures to cool off at night in some of the eastern interiors. But for southeast, it's meant a break from the rain and the clouds that you've been fairly used to really for most of the summer. Out across the west, though, the low pressure is dragging in colder weather, and for now, it looks like some of the warmest and some of the coldest weather, I should say, is still situated up across the Chukchi coast. Haven't seen a whole lot of that wintry precipitation make its way much further south than that, but persistent cold there is allowing the rain and snow to mix, but still well off the northwestern coast of Alaska. But for the southwestern locations, Norton Sound, Kobuk and Noatak valleys, and parts of the Kuskokwim and the lower and middle Yukon valleys, it's been fairly rainy. And because of that, looks like conditions will continue to promote that possibility for some occasional flooding, and that's what we're talking about with the flood advisories there for the Seward Peninsula and parts of the north and west. It's also going to mean fairly wet weather for south central and southwestern Alaska to finish out the week, as several waves of rain will be working through from west to southwest, moving north and northeast. Some of that occasionally working its way through the middle Tanana Valley and areas around Fairbanks as well. Here's a look at the weather map from this afternoon. Periods of heavy rain were already noted around places like Galena and north and west. Low pressure sitting just off the Chukchi coast at 996 millibars is kind of one of the main drivers at the surface here. Behind that, a frontal boundary stretches all the way down to the southern Bering Sea. At 991 millibars there, a second low is just north of the Aleutians, and that's bringing slightly drier air into the central and eastern chain, but pockets of rainfall have been forming around Kodiak Island, southern Cook Inlet, the Barren Islands, as well as Sand Point. Out across the east, high pressure sitting at 1,030 millibars. That's helping to keep things fairly dry for southeastern Alaska. You can see the visible satellite picture here is showing some breaks in the clouds across a large part of southeast today, as well as the eastern interior and just north of the eastern Alaska Range. Part of the reason the eastern Alaska Range is also drier this afternoon is that steady south flow is moving over some of the higher terrain and then drying out on the leeward side of that. So gusty winds and dry conditions, but certainly blustery for the moment there around the eastern Alaska Range and downwind. Tonight's weather map brings the front just a little bit further east into western Alaska. On the Chukchi coast, the front will be just east of places like Barrow. On the northern and eastern side, you're looking at rain and probably some drizzle in some locations. Not a big blast of cold weather with this, but notice as we go through the rest of the maps that this boundary will kind of hang out in the same place. When we look at the upper levels here a little bit later in the aviation section, notice where the jet stream is too. It's riding fairly parallel to this boundary here, and that's a really good setup for driving weather disturbances over the surface front, and that creates periods of rain that are fairly regular and also in the same old spot. That's one of those conditions that meteorologists watch for to help predict flooding. So we'll be watching that very carefully, especially around the northwestern parts of our state. Once again, the cold air doesn't really march eastward very quickly, but we have a steady stream of wet and warm air working up over southwestern Alaska, parts of south central, and certainly northwestern Alaska going forward. By Wednesday, warmer air is pushing off the coast of the Beaufort Sea. High pressure is still anchored across the central and eastern Gulf, with dry weather continuing for southeast. Might start off with some pockets of fog in the morning, but no huge concern right now. Low pressure is moving into St. Lawrence Island in the Norton Sound region at 999 millibars, and Wednesday looks fairly wet for the western half of Alaska and parts of south central. Out west, areas of showers across the western Bering Sea. A brief ridge tries to form across the central chain. It's not powerful enough to really clear things out of the way, but it's also not powerful enough to push the colder boundary eastward anymore into south central Alaska. There's Thursday. You'll notice that overall southerly flow starts to take on a slightly different shape. We'll push most of the moisture into the northern Gulf, into south central. We'll get some breaks across the interior, but showers could continue across the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, with the frontal boundary still in the same old place across northwestern Alaska. And again, that's the reason we're watching for flooding concerns, as moisture and clouds will like to form in this general vicinity here. Low pressure really has not moved in this case now for about 48 hours. Across southwestern Alaska, showers will continue, but you can see the ridge is starting to break the clouds up a little bit more into the Bering Strait. So if you're in Nunivak Island or perhaps the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, there's a chance you'll see a little more sunshine as we get into Thursday, maybe Friday. But right behind that is another slug of moisture, and that means a better chance for rainfall and an increasing wind from the west and southwest as we go into Friday and Saturday in many locations there. And you can see several disturbances working in from the south, moving northward, but the bulk of the cold air is still off to the north and west. So no big surge of cold weather coming in behind this initial wave of wetter weather across the west. And once again, for our friends in southeast, high pressure is still sitting nice and pretty right there across the central and eastern Gulf. 1,026 millibars and a generally clear sky, at least compared to what you're used to for this time of the year. Let's take a look at temperatures as we move forward here. We'll start with tonight, and we'll take this out 2 days for you. Around south central, overnight lows in the upper 40s to about lower 50s as you get down toward Homer. 49 degrees or so around Kodiak. Southeast, you're looking at overnight lows in the lower to mid 40s in most cases there. Places like Haines and Skyway could be a little bit milder in the upper 40s. Eagle down to 36, and some of the outlying areas possibly even colder. Around the Brooks Range and the summits there, upper 30s will do the trick, and notice how mild it is across the north slope, upper 30s to about 40 degrees from Barrow all the way out toward Kaktovik, out toward Wainwright. 30s and 40s for the Kotzebue Sound region. Nome, you're looking at 44. Places around Bethel and southwest closer to 50 degrees. Bristol Bay not too far off that mark, and mid to upper 40s for many across the Alaska Peninsula and the Central Chain. As we get into tomorrow afternoon, upper 50s and lower 60s for the Middle Tanana Valley and the 40-mile country. North Slope, you're looking at temps in the 40s west of Barrow, but to the east it could be even milder as that warmer flow is running into lesser amounts of clouds and precipitation. So again, fairly mild there from Kaktovik to Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse. 48 in Nome, southwestern locations back in the lower to mid 50s. McGrath, you're looking at temperatures in the lower 50s as well. South central mid 50s, southeast upper 50s to nearly 60 degrees as you get down toward Ketchikan and Annette. Lower 50s for most of the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, about 54 degrees. As we check on Thursday morning, temperatures back in the mid 40s for many locations in the interior. Up north, still above freezing. Southeast in the mid 40s there, and areas in south central just shy of 50 degrees. And by the time we get around to Thursday afternoon, notice it's still very mild across the middle and upper parts of the Tanana Valley, with the North Slope starting to cool down and around the Chukchi coast, but the Beaufort Seacoast stays pretty mild as we head toward the end of the weekend. I'll look for more mild temperatures as we get into Friday.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to flying weather now. A strong southwesterly flow across the west coast will keep IFR locked in across the southwestern Capes as we start your Wednesday morning. We'll also have a layer of IFR across the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range as we go into your early Wednesday. MVFR conditions across the Chukchi coast, across a large part of the lower end, maybe even the middle Yukon Valley and the upper Kuskokwim, and a large section of the central and western areas of the Alaska Range, as well as the Gulf. One thing to note, though, starting out in southeast for tomorrow morning, looks pretty good. VFR conditions should be fairly widespread for the inner and outer coastlines, as well as most of the local villages. And around St. Matthew Island, northward toward St. Lawrence Island, also some areas of clearer weather there. That should continue into Wednesday morning, so good news there. IFR conditions will stretch from Point Barrow all the way down toward about Point Hope, as well as the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range. Look for that to continue. MVFR creeps eastward through Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, with areas along the central and the upper Yukon valleys relatively clear. IFR conditions expected across the western Alaska Range, with MVFR creeping eastward, though, toward the outer coast of southeast, covering up a large chunk of Prince William Sound, and IFR conditions linger across the southwestern Capes. Going on to Thursday morning, notice IFR continues across the south-facing slopes of most of the Brooks Range there, again creeping eastward toward Adigan and Anaktuvik Pass. IFR pulls northward and toward the outer reaches of Portage, Prince William Sound, I should say, and the Barren Islands and the eastern sections of Kodiak Island. MVFR also still lingering very close to the outer coast of southeast. That continues through Thursday afternoon, with IFR stretching across the northern Gulf, across the central Aleutians, not quite to St. Paul and St. George, and conditions start to improve a little bit more across the western interior and the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, with IFR lingering across the far higher terrain areas of the upper Kobuk and Noatak Valley regions and the northwestern coast. Again, that's for Thursday afternoon. On to your pass maps. It looks like Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass should both linger around MVFR for your Wednesday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to see marginal conditions through most of your midweek day there. Rainy Pass expected to turn over to IFR as we go throughout your day. Windy Pass looking for instrument flight rule by the end of tomorrow afternoon. Isabel Pass starting out at marginal, leaning over toward IFR by the end of the day. Mentasta Pass expected to see visual flight rule through most of the day, and we should get there eventually for Tanita Pass starting out at MVFR, though. Portage Pass looking for marginal conditions throughout your Wednesday, and Chilkoot and White Pass, as we just saw, looks to be pretty good. VFR for both passes. Freezing levels indicate a cool pool of air across some of the upper Kuskokwim through parts of south central. The levels there at or below 6,000 feet, but you can see the trend is for even colder weather if you look to the north and west. The surface freezing line and levels as low as 2,000 to 4,000 feet over the Bering Strait communities. The Alcan border hovering close to 8,000 feet, and similar conditions there across most of southeast. Again, with that southwesterly flow, the warmest air is across the central and eastern sections of our state right now. Icing potential, though, is pretty high up there, levels at least 10,000 feet, if not higher. So while the risk looks somewhat increased at this point, moderate to considerable moderate across the west and northwestern areas of our state, remember that those levels where that icing would be occurring is pretty high up there, well above 10,000 feet. At the further north and west you go across southwestern Alaska, again, where we see that considerable moderate plotted right now. So for general aviation, a considerable threat probably is generally low at this point. The jet stream has high pressure across the central and eastern interior, a deep southerly flow coming across Kodiak Island and punching all the way to the north slope, 70 to 95 knots, but you can see a sizable trough out across eastern Russia right now. The wind speeds there 55 to 60 knots, and the Pacific jet racing across the region just south of the Aleutians right now with wind speeds anywhere from 100 to 150 knots. Another trough across western parts of the lower 48, helping to guide the weather a little bit more from west to east. So right now the trough of low pressure just west of the Bering Sea is certainly in control. At 9,000 feet, the southwesterly flow is evident here across the west coast, 30 to 35 knots or so. It looks like high pressure across the Gulf will gradually creep eastward in time. Wind speeds across the north slope a little bit up there, around 35 to 45 knots, and west and northwesterly winds across the Bering Sea will keep the next wave of weather developing over the western locations for the next couple days. Low pressure sitting across the Pribilofs at this point, guiding in some southwesterlies for Bristol Bay around 20 to 40 knots. Stronger winds across the western Brooks Range as well, 20 to 35 there, 45 knots around Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse, and high pressure slowing down the winds a little bit more across the central and eastern Gulf. So if we find turbulence, it's going to be across the western half of the state and generally below 4 to about 6,000 feet. Watch for some chop up across the north slope as well. We'll be back in just a few minutes with the rest of your marine weather. Welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us once again is our good friend Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska. He is here and has been here many times to talk to us about weather satellites and how those can help Alaskans understand our weather, how we can do better detection, keep more people safe from things even like volcanic ash. But today, Eric, you're going to talk to us a little bit more about weather satellites and how that can keep Alaskans safe and protect our property from wildfire, right?
That's right, Dave. Today's topic is where there's smoke, there's fire. And thanks for having us back again to Alaska
Anytime.
Weather. Well, weather satellites have a lot of different instruments on them. It turns out that the electromagnetic spectrum has a lot going on in it, and only one part of that is visible light, what we see.
Right.
Weather satellites, of course, report that. Today's topic is wildfires.
Okay.
There are some people who say that in Alaska in the summertime you don't have severe weather. These people are usually from Oklahoma or somewhere, and F5 tornadoes tend not to occur in Alaska.
Right.
People have also said what we do have in the summer. What is Alaska's severe summer weather can be hydrology,
Right.
flash flood and erosion in the mountains and things like that, and fires, wildfires.
Absolutely.
Those were here in 2004, certainly remember that. We've got an example here from 2014. Now it was a quiet season overall, but in May, down on the Kenai Peninsula, we had a wildfire on the Funny River, and this is a satellite image from a polar orbiter that went right over Alaska, and we can see the plume of smoke coming out of that fire on the Kenai, curling down. It's caught in the wind. It goes down toward Kodiak Island, curves around. You can see it circulating around a low pressure system that's in the Gulf of Alaska.
It was a beautiful picture.
Oh my gosh.
Except there was a fire.
There's a fire there. The nice thing is with this satellite image, you can tell where the fire origin is, where the smoke is coming from. And it's a color image. We're looking at the wavelength spectrum of about 0.4 to 0.7 micrometers or microns. That's what the human eye would see. If you were riding on the satellite and looked down, you could see this kind of an image.
Right.
So that's pretty nice. But it turns out there's more to the electromagnetic spectrum than just visible light.
Okay.
You've heard of infrared, ultraviolet, that kind of thing. If we move into longer wavelengths, let's go to one specifically, 3.7 microns.
Okay, 3.7.
Why worry about that one?
Okay.
Well, we've got an example here. 3.7, it turns out, happens to be very sensitive to a certain temperature range, temperatures where fires burn.
Okay.
And so we've got an example zoomed in a little more from that same Funny River fire down on the Kenai Peninsula, and we can see that you get up into a few hundred degrees Fahrenheit, and that's where the colors are. We can see there on the Funny River fire to the west and to the east, almost a horseshoe shape there, is not only we're seeing where the fire is in a general sense, but specifically where it's the active fire
That is where
front.
it's burning right now.
And it's
Amazing.
3.7 microns is the important temperature there.
Okay.
That's right.
So this is really important to firefighters on the ground, people that are making plans and directing the firefighters on where they need to go and cut the trenches and keep people safe.
You know it. If you want to fight that fire, you got to know where it is.
Okay.
You got to know the leading edge. We've also got a movie loop, nothing quite like animating it in time.
Yeah.
You can see the fire spreading out over time with a succession of film or a succession of images. Now this is one channel, 3.7 micron. You know, we looked at that color smoke image before.
Right.
and that's actually a red, a green, and a blue. That's how you get color imagery. What if you took 3 different wavelengths in the infrared? You went from like 2.2 micron, 1.5 micron, up to 3.7. You mix them together, you get this other kind of color image, which is even a better way to sharply bring out the details of where that leading edge of the fire is.
Okay.
You'll note, though, in the infrared, guess what? We don't see the smoke. That's too bad. And on these movie loops, you can see the clouds go by. These channels can't see through clouds. The lesson is there's no one perfect solution. You got to have the visible, you got to have some of that infrared single 3.7 channel, some of the infrared mixing to help get a different perspective. Another one, we've talked before about a fun channel called the day-night band.
Yes, one of my favorites.
Oh yeah, and in Alaska in the winter, it's great. We've got all this darkness. The day-night band is so sensitive to seeing light. You can see features that otherwise aren't available. Now in Alaska, when you have a forest fire, it tends to be light out all the time. It's our summer. But we can go down south to the Rim Fire in California in 2013. Now, okay, it was in California, not Alaska, but Alaskan crews went down to fight that fire, so we can talk about it here on Alaska Weather. Here we have a 3.7 micron channel shot of the rim fire, again kind of a horseshoe shape, showing that active fire front down there. And then we'll look again to the day-night band, the visible light, and then you can see how the fire is all bright. You can see the active fire front and actually the city lights over there too. Turns out that the cities, while they're active in a social sense, are not really hot in a fire sense. So they don't show up in the 3.7 micron. They're not hot like a fire is, but the fire in the cities look the same from a visible light perspective. And a fun thing here too is that we can see the smoke plume going north from the rim fire on the day-night band. So if we were ever to have, like in 2004 in Alaska, you get dark at night, we still had an active fire season that year. That was, you know, that really bad year. The day-night band didn't exist then, but if we had fires now in August, we could use it then. The lesson here is weather satellites, they offer many different wavelengths of light. Some are used for different purposes, and some of these that we just looked at tonight are especially helpful here in Alaska to find and to track the behavior of these wildfires so the crews can go out there and do their jobs.
Sure. So a satellite toolbox for the firefighting crews and the fire weather forecasters, and it just underlines how important satellites are, especially for Alaska and our mission for the National Weather Service to protect life and property and also to enhance the national economy.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Here's the latest look at your sea ice edge. Remember, you can always get the latest information online at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. As far as today's analysis goes, the nearest ice pack from Barrow is about 400 nautical miles to the north. We're nearing the sea ice minimum as we get into the next week or so watch for news on that. From Kaktovik, the ice pack is about 150 nautical miles to the north and to the east. So nothing's in the navigational waters right now, but if you're going well away from shore, you might notice a few strips from time to time breaking off the main ice pack. But again, most of that is well away from the nearest coastline. Let's look at southeast now for the latest winds. Things are fairly calm. Remember, you're on the east side of high pressure. The winds and the skies should be fairly tame over the next several days. Southerly breeze working in through the Lynn Canal, 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. A little bit further down the coastline, northwesterlies through the inside waters, 15 knots, up to 20 knots really when you get down to the Clarence Strait. 3 to 4 foot seas on the inside. Across the outer coast, 10 to 20 knots there with the strongest winds outside of Craig and Metlakatla. Northerlies there with a 6-foot sea. Up north, 4-foot seas should be expected out toward Yakutat and Icy Cape. By Thursday, not a really big change at all. You can see the seas are building here as the colors get deeper. That means higher seas as you get out into the central and western Gulf. But for the outer coast, you're looking at 10 to 15 knot winds for most areas, west to northwesterly flow, picking up as you head out toward the Dixon entrance. And in the inside passages, winds come up just a little bit more, 15 to 20 knots, still holding on to that southerly breeze blowing in through the Lynn Canal with 20 knots with a 4-foot sea as you head into Thursday. A look at South Central now shows that light winds are blowing through Prince William Sound, a 15-knot wind there on the inside with a 3-foot sea, 5-foot seas on the outside. Southerlies are picking up a little bit more across the Barren Islands, 25 to 30-knot winds there with 8 to 9-foot seas expected, and light winds across the northern Cook Inlet, 15 knots with a 4-foot sea for Wednesday. By Thursday, the winds settle down a little bit more. Northeasterlies kicking in. Look for an east and southeasterly flow across the Kenai Peninsula and into the southern Cook Inlet. We saw those winds and seas picking up a little bit across the central and western Gulf, and here they are. Southerlies up to 25 knots, 9 to 11-foot seas closer to the coastline, but even higher seas are expected out in the central Gulf. And east and southeasterly winds are picking up around Prince William Sound, 20 to 25, with 4-foot seas on the inside, 9-foot seas on the outside for your Thursday. Across Bristol Bay, southerlies up to 25 knots with a 6-foot sea. 8-foot seas down the coast. South and westerlies picking up just south and west of Kodiak Island up to 35 knots with 14-foot seas there on Wednesday. By Thursday, notice those diminish to 20 knots with 9-foot seas with winds still out of the south and west. Southerlies in Shelikof Strait could hang on to about 15 knots with 5-foot seas for the afternoon, and west and southwesterlies across the Bering Strait or the Bering Sea coast, 4 to 6-foot seas there for your Thursday afternoon. For the Aleutians, a west and southwesterly flow initially for the central and eastern chain. That becomes southwesterly for the eastern chain, but northwesterly as you head into the central and western sections there, 15 to 25. Look for 7 to 8-foot seas in the west. Compare that to 8 to 10-foot seas there from Unalaska out toward Nikolsky on Wednesday. For Thursday, a strong southerly flow picks up. You'll notice those winds coming up to 30 to 40 knots. The strongest winds probably on the south-facing coastlines, 13 to 14-foot seas with that as well. Behind that front, we get into a north and easterly flow from Adak out toward Kiska, 25 to 30 knots, and you're looking at 6 to 7-foot seas across the eastern chain as southerlies continue there around 25 knots. For the west coast, light southerly winds across Norton Sound. 5-foot seas are expected to blow into places like Nome, with west and northwesterlies coming into the west coast there, 15 to 20 knots, 5 to as high as 8-foot seas on a stronger southerly flow coming into the Kuskokwim Delta, and northwesterlies from St. Matthew down toward St. Paul and St. George, 20 knots with 7 to 8-foot seas on Wednesday. Winds reverse course to a southerly direction as you get into Thursday with 30-knot winds around St. Matthew, 6-foot seas there. Light winds continue inside of Norton Sound, 10 knots with a 3-foot sea. And across the Arctic coast, south and westerly winds coming up the Chukchi. It looks like 10 to 15 knots with 3 to 5-foot seas in many areas. A gentle southerly breeze around Kaktovik, 15 knots there. Northwesterlies just south of the Bering Strait. As you get into Thursday, winds remain fairly light, if not a little variable, closer to the north slope, 3 to 4-foot seas there. And southerlies are driving up the Chukchi coast with 4 to as high as 7-foot seas. Going in toward Cape Lisburne and Point Hope for your Thursday. Recapping tonight's weather, rain will be a large factor across the west. Flood advisories for many areas in the the Seward Peninsula and the Kobuk and Noatak region as southerlies are bringing in very wet air. A widespread region of 2 to 3 inches of rain is possible. On some isolated cases, maybe as much as 4. So watch for flooding on your local streams and rivers there. Winds will be an issue across the eastern Alaska range. Some gusts could reach from 40 to 60 miles per hour. That could stretch into the Denali range and also the Kobuk and Noatak region. Rain will continue along a frontal boundary in the west that doesn't move much as we head toward the end of the week. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.